Welcome to my channel, General Mind. Today we will talk about deep brain stimulation. I hope that you're all doing absolutely fantastic. And for those of you who are new to the channel, hi there. My name is Naim. I am a medical doctor, a PhD student and a neuroscience researcher. So if you like any of those things, then consider following because that would be absolutely fantastic. In this video we'll talk about deep brain stimulation, and this came out of a recent discussion that I had with someone where I found out that even though they have heard of DBS before, they really don't know how it works and what it is. And given that this technology is advancing by leaps and bounds at the moment, I thought it might be interesting to make a video on this topic. So without further ado, let's get into it. So what exactly is deep brain stimulation? As the name suggests, it has two parts. We have deep brain and we have stimulation. So deep brain refers to a group of nuclei deep within the brain that are quite small and are related to each other in terms of function. These are called the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia are a group of nuclei that are quite small but are very important in terms of motor control, meaning that they are important for movement. There's also another part called the thalamus that is involved in sensory processing, attention and memory, and the hypothalamus, which is involved in maintaining homeostasis or keeping our bodies at a steady state. Both of these structures are technically not part of the basal ganglia, but they are often mentioned together with them. The second part of the name is stimulation, which means that we are going to be applying an electrical signal to these deep brain structures to modulate their activity. So the way this happens is by sticking an electrode into one of these structures. In some cases we can target the globus pallidus or the subthalamic nucleus, which are both part of the basal ganglia. These electrodes are typically made from either platinum or iridium because these materials don't cause any adverse reactions in the body. So this electrode is connected to a device that is partly implanted under the skin of the chest and partly left outside of the body. This external part is connected to a power supply that is typically worn on the belt, and also to a programmer which allows us to adjust the settings of the stimulation. So why do we want to stick an electrode into someone's brain and then send electrical signals through it? Well, the answer to this question is actually quite complicated and goes back decades. So it first started off in the 1980s when researchers were trying to treat the debilitating symptoms of Parkinson's disease. This was done by essentially ablating or destroying tissue in the subthalamic nucleus, because researchers believed that this area was somehow responsible for the motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. However, instead of destroying this structure, they actually started stimulating it, and they found that this resulted in an improvement in the motor symptoms. However, this effect only lasted for around 2 hours after turning off the stimulation. The motor symptoms returned, and this is when they decided to implant a permanent electrode in the brain so that they didn't have to keep connecting this person to a machine. They did this, and the person lived for years with this electrode in their brain, and they noticed that not only did it help their motor symptoms but also their psychiatric symptoms. Unfortunately, this person eventually passed away due to complications from surgery, and they were unable to retrieve the electrode from their brain, which was a bit of a shame. But nonetheless, this led to a whole host of other studies looking at using DBS to treat various disorders. Why did they start using DBS to treat these various disorders? It was because it seemed to work so well in this patient. Now, the problem is that the results weren't always consistent across patients. In some patients it worked really well, and in others it didn't seem to work at all. And this led researchers to believe that perhaps the basal ganglia are not the root cause of these disorders, and therefore, if you are trying to treat the symptoms by modulating their activity, you're kind of treating the wrong thing. So then they started looking deeper into the pathophysiology of these disorders to try and find a better target. Currently, most of the research is focused on two structures: the anterior cingulate cortex and the internal capsule. The anterior cingulate cortex is a structure in the prefrontal cortex that seems to play a role in decision-making. And the internal capsule is a large bundle of axons that relays sensory and motor information between different parts of the brain. By stimulating these areas, researchers are hoping to improve the non-motor symptoms of these disorders, such as the psychiatric symptoms. It's also important to note that DBS is not meant to cure any disorder, but rather to alleviate the symptoms. The reason for this is because the way that we currently stimulate these structures doesn't really turn them off or on. Rather, it changes the firing pattern of the neurons within them, meaning that if a neuron is firing very fast, we'll slow it down, and if it's not firing at all, we'll make it fire more often. So it's not really a cure, but it's more like a volume knob for your symptoms. Which brings us to the question, what disorders can DBS actually help? Well, currently, DBS is FDA approved to treat movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, and dystonia. However, it is also being investigated for its use in treating other disorders such as obsessive-compulsive disorder, major depressive disorder, addiction, and even Alzheimer's disease. There was a really fascinating study published a couple of years ago where they used DBS to treat depression. What they found was that the majority of patients showed a really great response to DBS. However, there was one patient in particular who was really fascinating. They found that this individual had a very specific network in their brain that responded to DBS, and that this network was also active during a specific type of meditation that this person had been practicing for many years. This is really fascinating because it shows that DBS may not be a one-size-fits-all approach and that we may need to tailor it to the individual patient to get the best possible outcome. Another really cool application of DBS is in the treatment of epilepsy. In this case, instead of using it to stimulate the brain, they use it to record the activity of the brain. This is done by sticking an electrode into the brain and then recording the electrical activity of the neurons. Then they can analyze this data to find the region of the brain that is responsible for the seizures. Once they've identified this area, they can then stimulate it with DBS to stop the seizures from happening. This approach has been shown to be really effective in stopping seizures in people who have drug-resistant epilepsy. However, despite all of these advances, there are still some problems with DBS. One of the main ones is that the battery that powers the device that is implanted in the chest needs to be replaced every few years. This is a bit of a hassle for the patient, and it can also be dangerous if the battery fails. Another issue is that the electrodes can sometimes get infected, which can lead to inflammation in the brain. This is called a cytokine storm, and it can cause a lot of damage to the brain. Fortunately, this is relatively rare, but it is still something that researchers are trying to figure out how to prevent. Finally, one of the biggest issues with DBS is that it is very expensive. The entire procedure can cost upwards of $200,000, which is a lot of money. This is one of the reasons why DBS is not used more widely, especially in developing countries where it is really needed. Overall, DBS is an amazing technology that has come a long way since it was first developed. It has helped countless people around the world, and it continues to be refined and improved. Who knows what the future will bring in terms of DBS, but one thing is for sure, it is an amazing tool that gives us hope for treating some of the most debilitating disorders known to man. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a comment below. I would really appreciate it. And if you didn't like it, that's okay too. Just let me know why in the comments below. I always appreciate constructive criticism. This has been a really cool topic, and I think I will talk more about it in the future as more developments arise. Anyways, thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.